Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Derbyshire Dales Planning Committee. You are being recorded live on YouTube, so if any of the people tonight, especially in the public, don't want to be recorded and put on YouTube, please let Jackie, the committee clerk, know, and she'll try and get you out of the picture. So we're not going to have a fire drill tonight, so if you do hear the siren, it is for real. Please leave by the double doors, go downstairs, out of the main entrance, and congregate at the back of the top car park. Okay, so that's the housekeeping out of the way. We'll move on to the agenda. So item 1, apologies please, Jackie.
Yes, Chair. Apologies tonight from councillors Burfoot, Fitzherbert, Pawley and Purdy, and attending as substitutes are councillors Cruz, Froggatt and Wakeman.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Item 2, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. I so move.
Second, Chair.
All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous, they're carried. Right, item 3, interest. Any councillor declaring an interest in the items we're discussing tonight? No? In which case then we'll move on with the full body of the committee now. So we'll move on to item 4.1, which is application number 19/01097. It's a full application incorporating land into residential curtilage and a 2-storey extension at Top Farm Cottage, Farley Lane, Farley. There is 3 speakers on this. The first speaker I have is Councillor Steve Crystal, and he's from Darley-Dale Town Council to make comment. You have 3 minutes, and when you've got 30 seconds left, I'll indicate.
So, my name is Steve Crystal, I'm representing Darley-Dale Town Council, and we would like to speak in support of this application. We looked at the application and we had absolutely no objection. We felt that the property would benefit from the proposed extension to make it a nice symmetrical family home, and did not feel like there were any issues such as overdevelopment. We understand that the property will lose the cat slide roof and stack. However, we understand that these are not original features. I think they were fitted about 50 or 60 years ago roughly. And whilst the conservation consultation states that it will be regrettable to lose the features, the report does not conclude that it will be detrimental to the property or the area. We understand that the materials which are to be removed will actually be incorporated into the new extension. We also understand there's been no objections from any other parties. Looking at the development which has taken place on Farley Hill over the last few years, it's really encouraging to see an applicant following the documented procedure for planning applications rather than just building whatever they want. But also the applicants, in our opinion, made sure that the scale of the development is not overbearing. So we fully support this application.
Thank you very much, Steve. Right, the second speaker I have on my list is the ward member for Darley-Dale, Councillor Mark Salt. You have 5 minutes, Mark, and I will let you know when you get 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I speak on behalf of the ward member and applicant in support of the application. Sorry about that. You've all visited the site now. You've had a good look round you now. I would hope conversant with the nature of the locality and the buildings that are in it. It's good to note, I think, that whilst the applicant could have achieved most of what they wanted in terms of extending this building through permitted development, they've decided not to, and in my view, taken a very conscientious approach and engage with planning officers from the outset, which is nice to see, as has already been said, especially on Farley Hillside. I've read it in considerable detail, and I'm pleased to see that the officer acknowledges that it's a finely balanced application, and the nature of it, and the nature and degree of what's to be done is also finely balanced. And it's that finely balanced nature of it that's the thrust of my argument to say why this evening, if you wanted to, I think you could grant the application. I'm also pleased to see it's worlds apart from other matters that have happened on Farley Hill. It seems to be a very sensible approach, and in my view, perhaps the officer, and I make no criticism of the report of the officer, but it was come down on the side of caution in this particular one, and that's not surprising, I say, given the things that have happened on Farley Hill in the last few years. I think you could view it a little more positively, and in doing so you'll be able to grant the application. It's conceded in the main that the size and principle of the extension is acceptable, and that the loss of the cat's eye roof, while regrettable, is going to be an inevitable part of any extension on that building. So I think the starting point must be for this evening that it's an extension is acceptable, it's just what type. I think it could also be argued, it's correct to say that a change of the roof profile is inevitable as part of any extension, and on this occasion the officer said that the roof line will be far too complex for the host building. Well, I'm sure you've all looked at the elevations that come with the application, and I hope you'd agree with me that it doesn't look too complex. It's not something we've never seen before. It's not something that will stand out a mile in that locality. And I would say that it's quite complementary. If you're going to extend and develop that building, I would say that the elevations that we've been given to look at look quite complementary and would suit that locality very well. Again, I think to say it's too complex is an overly cautious opinion and not one that I share, and one that I urge you perhaps not to share either. The host building itself, I think, could easily take this kind of extension. The gable end tufts out, and the way it's been designed isn't too big. It doesn't look like it's out of character with that particular building and the host buildings it's called in the report. And I would say that the way it's been done doesn't offend the eye at all. And I would say it's going to be a difference. You're going to have an extension. There's going to be a difference. And the way it's been done is sympathetic to the area, sympathetic to the buildings around it, and it's an acceptable difference. And I hope you share that view. The other reasons for refusal are the impact of the development on the heritage asset, which are very close to it. One of those reasons is the dorms which have been designed into the north elevation, which are said to be out of character with the building. I wouldn't accept that, and I would say that they're actually very in character with the heritage asset itself, because that appears to have dorms in most of the windows. And I think strike a sympathetic note towards the asset rather than offending it. The host building is not the closest building to the heritage asset. In fact, probably the most prominent building as you approach that site is the closest, and that one has a very big gable end and a huge glazed area, so that's not a traditional looking building. In my view, the way that the applicant wants to do this is much more traditional than that barn conversion that you see as you approach, and I think has considered that in the way they want to develop it. They don't want something modern looking, they want something that looks like it's been there forever, and as it weathers in, it'll look like it's been there forever. Effectively what they're trying to do is turn a house into a family home. The wider scope are a number of developments adjacent to it, near that heritage asset, which sit very uneasily with me within their surroundings, but I have received permission by one means or another. In the
30 seconds left, Mark.
Thank you. I can understand the cautious approach completely and make no criticism of the officer for their approach. I would simply argue this committee is justified in taking the approach that the proposed changes don't defend the character and nature of the heritage asset or the host building or the locality sufficiently to refuse it. And I think I should urge you to consider granting it as it's proposed.
Thank you very much, Mark. The next speaker on my list is the applicant, Mr. James Waters. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Waters, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening, I'm James Waters, the applicant, as you just heard. We acquired the property at the end of May to make a family home in lifelong residents of the Dales, and appreciate the nature of the building work that goes on here. So we quickly got an architect on board, and he advised submitting a pre-planning application to speed the whole process up. So that's what we did. He did probably go too far, as an architect does when he's given these sort of things, and I agree with the officer that the first pre-planning application was wrong, and yeah, we heard that straight away and requested a meeting. The advice of that application suggested building onto the west elevation, which we didn't want to do because we thought it would affect the look of the front of the house, and also there was thought there may be a water main there, but consequently that's not there. But to me, that sort of imposes more on one of the reasons we're here tonight, which would be the listed building. It would have gone closer to that. So initially we were advised to extend that way, but we chose not to. We again submitted a second pre-planning application, reduced the scale, reduced the glazing, and again reasons came back for this to be rejected, and requested another meeting. Unfortunately, this was the end of July. Due to leave, we couldn't get the site meeting until September, where we then discussed with the officer why we didn't want to go down to permitted development, but what was suggested we could have achieved with we want a good-looking family home to accommodate myself, my wife and my 2 children. And what was suggested, keeping the cat-slide roof, I don't think we could have achieved that, and yeah, it wouldn't have met our needs. So we discussed on the day with the architect and proposed 2 options: the gables as you see them there, and 2, excuse my ignorance, I don't know the correct words, but 2 gables going straight out onto the north elevation. Both were discussed, both were sketched out, and it was then said we will draw these up over the weekend. This was a Friday, and get them across on the Monday. Everyone shook hands with the intention of the time we lost, we would then submit a full planning application. No response came back on the Monday. An email was sent on Friday, and the architect asked for, should this be house application or full planning, and a reply was sent full planning, so that's what we did. Didn't hear anything back until a pre-planning response came back saying that this wasn't acceptable, and we were slightly confused. So yeah, basically it's been a fairly painful process, and we want to do things right, we want it to be in keeping with everything. Unfortunately, the cat-slide roof is going to be sacrificed. It's not an original feature, and the listed building in question has kind of lain empty since 1957 that we know about. The owner tried to turn it into a holiday cottage in 2004, I believe, which is when Heritage were brought in, and it was listed, making it financially unviable for them to make it into a holiday let. So we're kind of in limbo with that building being there, but yeah, I don't think I can add much more from what Mark said and what Steve said. We're trying to keep it in keeping with everything there, and do it correctly. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. Right, John and Sarah, is there anything you'd like to come back on?
Yeah, I'd just like to come to clarify what we gave as an example, that a change to this proposal would be acceptable to us. We did try to negotiate within this process also, and it was to have a cat slide coming from the ridge of the extension down, or a single-storey extension next to it, not coming up full 2-storey height, or a cat slide coming direct from the rear of the original dwelling. Both of those sort of suggestions didn't give them the space they needed, so obviously I've had to assess the application as submitted. I'd like to add that it's really the impact on the listed building that's the concern, and it's the west elevation. We feel, when we walked on the site visit round to the front of the farmyard, you could see both together. I do think it affects the setting. It is perhaps finely balanced, and it's for you to decide, but my recommendation is to refuse.
Thank you very much. Right, members, questions? No questions? Councillor Donnelly, you want to move to... There's no questions, then I'll move to debate.
No debate.
Councillor Donnelly?
Oh, in debate?
Yes. Yeah, we'll move to debate.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think in balance, I'm going to move against officer recommendation on this one, because I went on the site visit today, and the overlooking thing on the listed building, I don't see how this is going to be any difference to it is now, really. I think it's actually improving the actual building itself, because he's squaring the building off. If the applicant had gone the other way, could have gone with permitted development and not come with the application at all. So I can't see that, if it is a fine balance, but I think overall that it is the correct thing to grant permission on this rather than object to it. Listen to what a lot of people have said tonight, or alluded to different things which I could go through now, but I won't. And I think that I'm going to move against officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Does that find a second?
I'll second.
Do you want to make any comment at this point?
No, I
Councillor Hughes?
just would like to reiterate what Councillor Donnelly said.
Thank you very much. Any more?
Chair, can I take advice, Chair? I'm a few minutes late. I'm within reason abstaining.
I'm afraid you'd have to abstain from voting on this, Peter. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So, any more questions? Councillor Bull.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a point that part of the reasons on here is protecting a heritage and the listed building, and obviously from what we've seen and from how far away it is, there are already other detrimental things that are imposing on that listed building. So I don't really feel that any changes to the property that's looking for the application will be detrimental to that. And as stated, it has been empty for quite a long while. So within that, I think I would be able to agree with what the proposal is on the table.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bull. John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify for officers' perspective, I think this is one way you can come to a different on balance view in terms of impacts, but you need to be satisfied in your own minds that there's no harm to the setting of the heritage asset here, and that there's no material harm to the character and appearance of the dwelling by virtue of the extension that's proposed. If you do go down the line of supporting this scheme, we would like delegated authority to impose appropriate conditions on the construction of this extension and the garden wall. It's a very attractive stone property, and we need to make sure that the coursing of the stonework and the size of those pieces of stone are appropriate to maintain that existing character.
Thanks, John. Does that find support from the proposer and the seconder?
Yeah, yes, John, I'm quite happy to go along with the conditioning. I think it's quite important that is really that we do stay in content with the building, but I agree with you that I think the important thing is we are not being detrimental to the listed building. So I'll go along with your proposal.
Councillor Hughes, are you in support of that?
Yes, I'm in support of that, and particularly associated with the window detailing and so the windows are in keeping with the properties it is.
Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, going down to the detail, and if it's possible, I'd like to see the gable end stones carry through the gable design onto the new extension, if that's possible, or thought to be just taken into account.
Something that we could do on the delegation, John, will have a conversation with it.
Yes, I think that.
Stones at the verge. I just think to complement the what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's something we can do under delegated powers, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, members? So what we're doing, actually, we are moving for approval as set out by Tom and the seconder. All those in favour for approval, please show. All those against? So it has been granted for approval, and one abstention for Peter, of course. So that's been granted for approval. Thank you very much, members. As you know, item 4.2 has been withdrawn, so we'll go straight on to... Yeah. Councillor Slack, being as you entered the meeting late, have you got any interests on anything that's in the committee papers before you today? Right, thank you very much then, Councillor Slack. Right, moving swiftly on then. Item 4.3, which is application 19000996, full application, and this is for demolition of existing buildings and erection of 3 number buildings comprising an office, storage and workshop buildings with associated park and hard standing at Land off Derby Road, A52 Ashbourne. Now, I've only got one speaker on this, so if Councillor Harris would like to take the hot seat, so to speak. You have 3 minutes, and I will let you know when there's 30 seconds left. So over to you.
Right, good evening, I'm Jane Harris from the Ashbourne Town Council, who's voting against the application. Members feel that this, in the middle of a residential area with an industrial estate in close proximity and the proposed future development taking place there, it is unnecessary. They feel it will cause an unnecessary increase in traffic on a heavily overloaded road, which is soon to have 2 additional junctions added on the proposed new roundabout. Members also agree with the archaeologist's report that an historic buildings appraisal should be undertaken in order to assess the archaeology and historical significance of the building, which is due to be demolished. This requirement is in line with the NPPF Para 198, which requires developers to establish the significance of any heritage assets which will be affected by their proposals. We should be reconsulted on the application when the required document has been produced. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Anything that the officers like to come back on?
Yes, Chair. Couple of points. Officers have considered carefully the issue of whether we should or shouldn't require an archaeological report before we issue a decision on this particular application. The reality of the situation is, however, two things come into play. First of all, we've previously granted a permission for 2 industrial units on this site without any requirement to carry out an archaeological appraisal. The second consideration that we've taken into account is the building doesn't receive any statutory protection, even though it's of some historical interest and significance because of its relationship to the airfield. But that does mean, unfortunately, that should somebody want to demolish that building, that's something they could do without securing planning permission first. Now, given the difficulty in trying to utilise that building and the fact that it sort of sits slap bang in the middle of the site, we think a proportionate approach in this particular instance is to grant planning permission but to require the archaeological recording of the features on site before development commences, so at least we've captured that bit of Ashbourne's history going forward. The other thing, Chair, that I just need to mention to you, I've noticed on rereading the report today that there's a condition that we would need to add to this scheme. It is quite a significant industrial development, sat within an industrial allocation on the north of the site there, and I think we need an additional condition which should read along the lines of before building works commence, a scheme of measures to maximise energy efficiency and minimise energy usage within the buildings shall be submitted to and agreed in writing with the local planning authority, and the development shall be carried out in accordance with that scheme. That's in accordance with our plan policy PD7. I know it's something that members are very keen to see happen, and it's an appropriate condition in this circumstance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, members, open to you. Questions? Councillor Archer.
Just a question about the points the Town Council made, I think are interesting in terms of this is, although it backs onto an industrial site, it is in a strip of domestic dwellings and so on. So, and this point they make about the development of the airfield going forward, there will be provision made there for more industrial sites such as this. And I think the point about another junction coming out onto this road, now I've looked at what the highways have said, and obviously they've assessed it isn't a concern, but we are going to have other junctions when the airfield development takes place as well. So the question is, to what extent can we consider planning at this stage that there will be very shortly future opportunities for people to put industrial units in perhaps a more suitable place on the industrial on the airfield, rather than in this sort of domestic dwelling strip coming out onto the main road and creating another junction? Because in a way, this sort of development would fit better, I think, further onto the industrial estate than it would here. But having said that, when I've looked at it from a public planning point of view, I can't particularly see why I wouldn't approve it now, but it looks like it would be better in the future to put it somewhere else on the airfield rather than this particular spot, because of the access to the highway and the fact it has got houses either side.
Shall we want to come back on?
Yeah, I think there are a few factors that come into play. One important consideration is that we've previously, as an authority, supported an alternative scheme of industrial development on this particular site. The northern portion of the site, not the whole site, interestingly enough, but the northern third of the site is allocated for employment development. But of course, to carry out employment development on this site, you need an access, and you can't gain access from the north because there's an obstacle in the way. There's an embankment, there's a tree belt that separates the site from the neighbouring industrial site. So clearly, you have to have quasi-industrial use on the frontage of the site with access and parking to make it a viable proposition. The other consideration, obviously, is the current buildings on site. They've got a quasi-industrial character in being former airfield buildings, and whilst it's always a difficult judgment, we feel that section of the road in Ashbourne has quite a mixed character. There are industrial buildings that break through and that you see from that road, which, you know, we deem it to think it's an appropriate introduction of relatively small industrial units, but they will serve a purpose of allowing Ashbourne to go forward and prosper in the future.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Slack.
I'm just looking at the application. I can't see any the power in. Is it solar panels? It will be. I can't see any mention of them on the roof.
No, the council site, there isn't anything within the building design at the moment. That's why I'm suggesting we impose a condition to ensure that before built development commences, we secure measures to maximise energy efficiency and reduce energy needs.
Thank you.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, I'm led to believe the site is accessed from the. It has already got a entrance from the A52. Is that right? It's still using the same access.
That's right. The access isn't generally in the same position. It's got to be improved slightly.
Yeah, the only thing I read on the report is it's only 10 metres back from the highway. Well, if you've got a lorry, I think it needs to be moving further back than 10 metres. Thank you.
Any more questions, members? No? In which case then we'll move to debate. Members? Councillor Lees?
Yeah, I'd like to go along with the officer's recommendation on this one.
Okay, does that find a seconder?
Second that.
Would you like to speak against it,
Yeah, I
Councillor Slack?
think the officers got this right. It's said as John's already said, it's already part of the site is to earmark for industrial development, so it has to have access on the main room. So yeah, I'm fully agreeing with the officers.
Thank you very much, Peter. Councillor Donnelly, do you want to make comment?
Yeah, regarding what Stuart said about the conditioning on the extension of the site itself on the traffic areas, John, what can we put a condition? What numbers can we put that? 20 metres, or you know, we need to be looking at reasonable access, I think, because otherwise, if Stuart said if you get a very large vehicle in there, you know, 10 metres is not a lot, is it?
No, all I would say is the local highway authority have vetted the previous scheme on this site, which was designed along very similar lines, and have considered the detail for this. Now, they'd be fully aware of the fact that these are industrial buildings that may attract lorry movements. They're happy to support it with conditions.
Anybody else? Councillor Butler.
I'm interested in the drainage system that's with it. You know, reading through the report on drainage and the potential impact of the development, where there's going to be a significant amount of hard standing on the site. One of the things is that it will go into the stormwater sewers. So it would be good to make sure that any SUDS is done, any drainage solution is done on the basis of infiltration rather than increasing the risk of flooding down in Ashbourne.
I think there are opportunities, Chair, within how we design the landscaping around the parking areas to incorporate that objective.
Councillor Archer.
Just coming back to the issue of the access for lorries and trucks, and at point 7.2 it does say that the applicants do not expect articulated vehicles on the site as the use of the buildings do not require deliveries of this nature. As anticipated, a rigid 12 truck would be more probable. So that is suggesting that they feel that articulated vehicles are not suitable, but that isn't, as I'm reading that, a condition. Are we able to put a condition on in terms of the type of trucks and things that are allowed? That's point 7.2. So not expected articulated vehicles on the site. Is that something we can put a condition on to say there will not be articulated vehicles on this site?
I think that condition would be really quite difficult to enforce. I think we have to take this on face value, that the units are targeted at particular types of end users. If over a period of time, when the developer starts to market this, they find that there's interest from a different type of user, then they've got the opportunity to come back and try and address that with a different layout.
Anyone else wanted to make any comments on the application? No, in which case we'll go to the vote. So it's been recommendation for approval with conditions and the extra condition that John has set out. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? No. So that has been carried. Thank you very much. So, moving on again. Item number 4.4. There is a little bit of late representation on this. I also have a few photographs which I'll distribute around to the committee myself. So I'll pass them on to Richard, and if you want to just pass them down and show them to others while you're reading the late correspondence, and then we'll move on. Thank you, members.
Just members, I think these are self-explanatory. They're photographs taken of when the valley down from Darley-Dale was in flood a couple of weeks ago. So.
Right, thank you, members. Before we move on, I'd just like to say we have got Rob Coggins here because this is a variation of condition to change the altered mix of housing. So if there's any questions pertaining to that, Rob will answer them for you. Anyway, so what we'll do is we'll move on with the speaker list. I've got 3 speakers on this application. The first speaker is Councillor Stephen Crystal of Darley-Dale Town Council to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Flooding has horrendous consequences, which I think we all witnessed recently with the very sad and tragic loss of life in Darley-Dale. Based on recent events and forecasted predictions, we believe there should be no development whatsoever on this site. Allowing development on floodplains and next to floodplains simply compounds the problem when these floods occur, and as the amount of land for soakaway is severely diminished. I refer you to an article from The Guardian dated November 12, 2019, which states that poor management of the rural landscape, along with global heating and building on floodplains, are the main factors that led to the floods that have engulfed towns in northern England. Met Office data shows the amount of rain from extremely wet days has increased by 17% when comparing 2008 to 2017 records with those from 1961 to 1990. The two wettest winters on records were 2013 to 14 and 2015 to 16. The Met Office calculates that an extended period of extreme winter rainfall in the UK, similar to winter 2013 and 14, is now about 7 times more likely because of climate breakdown. The floods that we're witnessing used to be considered a 1 in a 100-year event. However, the last event was only 12 years. The proposed development is clearly on floodplain, as you can see from the pictures you've had passed round. And when the flooding happens again, which it will, these properties will be housing some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Most of the people will be unable to secure insurance against flooding and will lose their homes and contents due to the climate change we're constantly being warned about. There's also a risk that these houses will simply become uninhabitable if flooding becomes more frequent. We at Darley-Dale Town Council believe that under Section 97 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, this permission could be and should be completely revoked with no development allowed on this site for the following reasons. It's in contravention of PD 10 of the local plan, it's in contravention of the emerging neighbourhood plan, and the recent flooding is now a major material consideration. In the original planning statement produced by Planning Design Practice Limited dated November 2015, point 6.2 claims that this site is suitable for sustainable development, and we disagree. National Planning Policy Framework states that sustainable measures means ensuring that better lives for ourselves don't mean worse life for future generations. Point 5.30 states that the residual risk will be managed by residents signing up to receive flood warnings. The developer clearly knows this land will flood, so how can this development be acceptable? And point 6.7 states that a very limited harm identified above has to be weighed against the need for more housing, particularly specialist housing for older people. They're trying to remove.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crystal. That's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker on my list is Councillor Julie Daly from Darley-Dale Town Council to speak against the application. You also have 3 minutes, and then indicate when you've got 30 seconds left.
Good evening, District Councillors. In January 2017, against the Planning Officer's recommendation, you granted this development outline planning permission, showing no regard for the then extant local plan policy MBE9 and its replacement, the then emerging policy PD10. In December 2017, the latest version of the local plan was finally adopted, yet still this land is not allocated housing on the policies map, but continues to be covered by policy PD10, a policy created to safeguard the intrinsic character and quality of the open spaces along the A6 and prevent the coalescence of the settlements of Matlock and Darley-Dale. How then do we find ourselves in this situation where the district councillors were and still are in clear contravention of their own policy? Because the original applicant, district councillor and Darley-Dale ward member Andrew Statham, promised 30% of the development would be affordable housing and 20% specialist housing. He also claimed that an area of temporary hardcore car parking on the site was previous development. And finally, he agreed to provide the area with a new pedestrian crossing situated at that end of the A6. Thus, the applicant managed to sway the District Council Planning Committee to vote in favour of the proposal. However, here we are nearly 3 years later, and the applicant is predictably backpedalling on the very conditions that secured the outline planning in the first place. Now we find that the car parking cited as previous development is actually not part of the area to be built on at all, and that perversely only the green parts of the field will be built on. Furthermore, the 20% specialist housing, so urgently needed according to the original application and crucial in swaying the vote in favour, is now suddenly unmortgageable and is to be replaced by affordable housing. However, the majority of the affordable houses will be sold on the open market. So just how affordable will they be? Given an average house price of over 300k in the area and the lack of clear regulation on this matter. Of course, we as the Town Council want to see affordable housing in our area, and we are fully supportive of a new crossing on this section of the A6. But at what cost? District councillors, what is the point of a local plan if you don't adhere to it? By voting in favour of this application tonight, you are in danger of making your very own local plan worthless and opening the floodgates to further unscrupulous development outside of the settlement boundary. Accordingly, I urge you, our district councillors, to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker I have on my list is Mr. Richard Piggott. He's the agent to speak in favour of the application. As you know, Richard, you've got 5 minutes and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today. I recommend the officer report, which provides a succinct analysis of the application. As you know, outline planning permission for up to 57 dwellings was granted in January 2017. And this included a requirement under condition 22 to provide 30% affordable housing and 20% specialist housing. It is the intention to sell the site to a registered provider of affordable housing, and discussions are at an advanced stage. Unfortunately, the terms of the specialist housing clause would be extremely problematic for registered providers, as it would prevent them from obtaining a mortgage. As an alternative, it is proposed to vary the condition to require 50% of the total number of homes delivered on the site.
Do you think you might speak a little more direct to the microphone? Some of our members are having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, okay. As an alternative, it is proposed to vary the condition to require 50% of the total number of homes delivered on the site to be affordable housing.
Excuse me, Councillor Wakeman. No, you can't. You have to put them back. Sorry, you're not supposed to take anything off anybody. Okay?
Thank you. Mr. Piggott.
Please continue.
As the legal agreement states that the 20% specialist housing had to meet the M43 standard, the application proposes that 11 of the bungalows must meet this M43 wheelchair user standard. Hence, the number of wheelchair accessible dwellings will be the same as originally approved. This application follows extensive dialogue with a range of registered providers. Furthermore, the Council's Strategic Housing Officer is supportive of the proposal, noting that the proposed changes would result in an increase in overall affordable housing numbers, and that if the restrictive condition is not varied as proposed, the development is unlikely to be delivered. The proposed variation of the condition is necessary to facilitate the delivery of the scheme, which will provide 50% affordable housing, comprising of 25 bungalows and 4 houses. The concerns that have been raised about flooding are not strictly relevant to this application. However, we welcome the roadside and drone photographs which we have shown to our drainage engineers. They advise that the recorded flood event appears to follow the line of flood zone 3 as shown on the Environment Agency flood maps for planning. The photographs show that floodwaters rose no higher than a large tree to be retained in the centre of the site, which is located at a height of approximately 93.3 metres. As you know, it is only proposed to build on the upper part of the field, and the finished internal floor level of the dwellings must be at least 1 metre above the level of the recent floodwaters, as required by condition 6 of the outline planning consent. Notwithstanding the above, I would reiterate that this application relates solely to the variation of condition 2 and is not related to the layout, let alone flooding. This matter should not therefore concern the committee in the determination of this application. The detailed site layout is currently the subject of reserved matters application, which is due to be considered by the Planning Committee in January 2020. And let's not forget the benefits of the scheme. The principle of the development has already been approved, and the site lies close to local services and amenities. The alteration to the specialist housing clause is the only proposed alteration and will not result in any fewer wheelchair accessible dwellings than previously approved. The Council's Strategic Housing Officer has confirmed that if the restrictive condition is not varied as proposed, the development is unlikely to be delivered. Should planning permission be obtained, it is anticipated that works will start on site in spring 2020 and would take approximately 18 to 24 months to complete. In conclusion, the application relates to a very specific issue and is supported by relevant consultees. It will assist the Council in delivering its housing requirements. You are therefore invited to follow the advice of your officers and approve the application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So, John, is there anything you'd like to come back on?
I think we'll do a triple act if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
I'll cover one of the points and then I'll hand over to Sarah to cover some of the other points. And that relates to the fact that the site is still washed over by policy PD10, which protects open spaces through Darley Dale. I've looked back through the history of this and I've compared it with other sites where we've granted planning permission. In all other occasions where we've granted planning permission on sites in places like Doveridge, we've taken those sites that have been granted within the settlement framework boundary and we've taken them out of the countryside designation. So I can only say that the fact that it's still washed over by PD10 is an anomaly, you know, and a historical mistake, and actually you should have proper regard to the fact that we've got an extant planning permission here in reaching your conclusions on the merits of this variation to the condition. Happy to hand over to Sarah to talk about flooding.
So whilst this application relates to the housing mix, obviously we need to discuss the flooding. You had your late reps where the agent has some advice from drainage engineers.
Sarah, could you speak a bit further into, because we've got one or two of them and Jeff in the chamber, unfortunately.
So the late reps looked at, you know, the agent had their flooding engineers look at the footage, the drone footage, the flooding photographs, and pinpointed points within that to establish whether they felt that it had gone beyond the floodplain, and concluded it hadn't. I've also got comment from the lead local flood authority, who have also reviewed the drone footage, and they think that it shows the floodwater in the areas defined by the limits of flood zone 2 and 3. The Environment Agency had no objection to the outline when we assessed that and granted it in 2017. And in making comments on the reserve matters application that's in currently, they just stipulate that the finished floor levels have to be above 600 millimetres above the 1 in 100 year floodplain. So that's a sort of finished floor level of 94.57, whereas the reserve matters application that's submitted in the layout, the finished floor levels are more on the scale of 95, so they're above that level. I can hand over to.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think I want to cover 3 points after responding to some of the comments that have been made already. In terms of insurance, housing associations often offer insurance to their shed owners as buildings insurance, and have their own schemes of contents insurance to provide for shed owners and people that rent. So in terms of people trying to get insurance on the open market where there might be a flooding issue, I don't think that's a concern in this particular case. The report alludes to the fact, and the comments also been made by one of the speakers, that potentially the whole site will be affordable housing, and that's a key element in our support from a housing perspective, with 50% sorry, with 80% being for rent and 20% for shared ownership. So again, I want to clarify points that were made in the comments, because the tenure split is 80% rent, 20% shared ownership. And the provision of bungalows is something we've been working with the agent for some time to ensure that we get really high standard in terms of floor areas and design, in terms of the ability to access and move in and around the property. And the M42 standard is the benchmark standard to provide accommodation for people with physical disabilities, of which there is a very limited supply within the district. So this scheme will go some way to meeting disabled need within Matlock and Derbyshire. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, if they come up on housing. Thank you.
Members, so we'll move into questions. Questions, members? Councillor Bull.
Yeah, can I, obviously, just listening to what Rob's just said, so from it being 30% affordable and the 20% specialist housing, which is 50 of the main development, it's now going into the whole 100% is going to be provided with 80 affordable and 20 shared. Is that what I've got right there, or am I doing the sums wrong?
Yeah, so the aspiration is for the whole site to be affordable. There's still a process to go to get to that point, but that's the bit that we've been working on as officers.
Yeah, John.
Yeah. I think Rob's right to describe that as an aspiration. That's certainly the plan. What you're being asked to determine tonight, though, is a scheme that is going to 50% affordable, but that is still, in our view, a betterment over and above what was originally agreed, because we will have the rights of nominations to make sure that the specialist housing, the accessible bungalows, go to those people who are most in need. Whereas the previous model, the current permission, we would have had quite a difficult job monitoring the Section 106 agreement to make sure that the housing was going to the right people in need. So we still feel, even at 50% as proposed, it's a better scheme than was originally granted.
Councillor Brown, did you want to answer the question?
You actually clarified what I was going to ask first of all, but just how it sounds like accessibility bungalows aren't actually, we don't have a lot of them in the Derbyshire Dales. Is that correct? So, I mean, as councillors, we can't really underestimate how important they are for people to be able to have a home which is accessible to them. Am I right in not underestimating how much of a benefit this is going to bring to local people with disabilities who need access?
Chair, yes, that's correct. We'll be at a tipping point soon where there'll be more people retired in the Derbyshire Dales than there are actually working. And we have very few in the affordable housing sector. We have very few purpose-built adaptive bungalows. We know from our disabled facility grant applications, again, each year the massive number of applications to provide adaptations to existing stock. What we haven't got is that supply of good quality new build housing that is much cheaper to adapt when it's necessary. And you can see from Darley-Dale in Olympian Way and Hills Close, we try and provide a small number of bungalows on site, and they've been pretty well taken up. But to make a big provision like this in one go would make a difference to a lot of people's lives.
Any more questions? Councillor Archer.
Just as someone who's new to the committee this year and not familiar with the history, am I correct in understanding that this site is not included in the local plan? But the reason that it's there for development is because before the local plan was agreed, permission was given for this development. Is that correct? And if it is correct, why was it not therefore put into the local plan if it had already been approved for development?
Generally speaking, sites that were granted planning permission ahead of the local plan being adopted are within settlement framework boundaries, but don't necessarily have housing allocations within the plan document. And those sites where we were expecting applications to come forward in the future are the ones that are allocated. There is an anomaly here, and I think it is an oversight, that in drawing the settlement framework boundary, it wasn't redrawn to address the fact that we'd already granted planning permission on this site for 57 units. I can't find anything that contradicts that view, because it would be illogical, wouldn't it, not to draw your settlement framework boundary to take account of that matter.
Any more questions? Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. How confident are you really? Because with the recent flooding, and we see 1 in 100 being radically reduced to 1 in 50, 1 in 20 some areas now. We're seeing much more flooding everywhere. I did support this at the time, and I still we believe in affordable housing, but these will be vulnerable people in bungalows here, and if this flooding and cutting off increase, there's no flood defences in that area I know of at all, so it could actually, and the report from the Environment Agency way back in 2017, I think if you look at it probably today, they'd have a different view after the recent floods and all the information coming through about climate change. I think we've got to be very diligent on this, and are you really confident that these properties won't get flooded at some point in the future?
Well, Councillor Slack, I think all we can do is take the advice of the experts on this that we consult on flooding issues, and the applicant obviously also needs to take their own advice. You know, they would be foolish to try and develop on a site where they knew there was going to be a flooding problem. All that advice at the moment points to the fact that the housing on this site is sufficiently elevated to sit well outside the area that floods, and people need to act on that information, and we couldn't come to a different conclusion than the one we've come to in the report based on those consultation responses.
Councillor Butler, did you want to?
Yeah, it was sort of relating to the flooding as well, and whether, you know, how will there be an opportunity to consider that when it comes to full planning to a full planning application? Is that something that we should be considering as part of this application or not?
Well, this application is just to vary the terms of the condition. There are already conditions imposed on the outline permission to deal with floor levels of properties and provision for surface water drainage and associated basins. There is an opportunity in dealing with the reserve matters application subsequently to look into the fine detail of how that will operate on the site. But let me be clear that the actual physical built development, the houses, sit outside of the area that's flooded on this site, so it should be feasible to build those without putting people at risk of flooding. But it's still obviously important within the body of the site to make sure that sustainable drainage is feasible.
Yeah, one of my concerns is the impact of this sort of development this close to a floodplain downstream in Matlock. So I went and spoke to people within Matlock who were a centimetre away from being flooded, and creating this area of an area of this sort of hard standing that close to the floodplain will cause floodwaters to rise downstream. That's what I'm concerned about. If that is something that we can talk that's for consideration as part of this report, then I won't worry about it, and I'll think about it for another time.
Yeah, well, I think the key point here, and you know, I think we are actually on the same side in this, is that within the development, outside of those areas that flood, it is incumbent on the developer to make sure that the sustainable drainage system that's designed is capable of retaining all the water within the site with no net worsening of runoff into the surrounding catchment, and that would be the objective of the SUD scheme that gets approved down the line.
Any more questions, members? No? Then we'll move into debate. Councillor Donwin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I think I'm satisfied with all the comments I've heard from the officers tonight, and I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Bull?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I listened to everybody's consciousness about the flooding, but obviously tonight that's on the agenda is just the condition of the planning permission and changing that over to making it 50% of the affordable housing. And yes, we have got reserve matters coming later, and I think that's the time to look into all the flood issues then. So I propose that.
Are you happy to second? Yeah. Anybody else wishing to make any comments on the application? Councillor Slack?
Yeah, I will support this tonight, like it's on a condition, but when it comes back again, we'll have to seriously look at this.
Well, that's why we have reserve matters.
Yes, that's right.
Anyone else wishing to make any comments? Councillor Cruz.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just to reiterate the concern probably that all members share. This is close to the floodplain. I think everyone's particularly nervous about that and about the impact that we've seen on people within our district. So I'd definitely be keen to understand how this is going to get reviewed going forward. I do also take into account the point that this is just looking at the variation. One thing, maybe I should have asked the question, but something that did occur to me was around we're still going to get the same amount of bungalows or specialist housing, but then I'm just trying to understand why there's a need for a variation. Am I missing something?
It's one of the key points of the application actually. The way the original permission was framed was there was provision of 30% affordable housing to comply with the local plan. But then within the legal agreement there was this additional offer in place for specialist housing. It was one of the reasons why members supported the scheme originally. Now that specialist housing scheme would have been open market accessible bungalows, and that's where part of the problem has arisen in terms of people, RSLs in particular, being able to secure mortgages on that element of the scheme, and it would have left officers with quite a problem in terms of policing that as a 106 and a condition to ensure that housing was being occupied by people that fulfilled the criteria. The benefit of the scheme is it puts the council in charge of those allocations by including it within the 50% of the affordable housing. So it puts us in a stronger position to make sure those in most need get access to that housing.
Thank you, John.
Right, members, if there's no more questions or comments, then we'll go to the vote. It's been proposed and seconded. Recommendation of approval. All those in favour, please show. That's been carried. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So moving swiftly on, this is a bit of a good news story for us and probably Rob. And Rob, as you see, is the only speaker we've got on 4.5. So without further ado, Rob, please come and have your 5 minutes of fame.
View from this angle, Chair. I definitely want to keep you more.
Bit like rabbits in the headlights.
Thank you, Chair, and councillors for giving me the opportunity to briefly discuss this application to provide external wall insulation to 11 properties on Hurst Farm. The Planning Officer's report sets out the history and context of non-traditional homes on Hurst Farm, so I don't intend to go into that in any detail. But I would like to say I think this is an ambitious project and a key part of the Council's wider partnership work with the Friends of Hurst Farm and the other agencies such as the CVS, Platform Housing Association and Castleview Primary School to help regenerate the area. Residents are keen to see physical changes take place on Hurst Farm, and so this project will mean something very positive to the community. I believe it will also encourage other agencies and funders to use their resources following the Council's lead. There are currently very few councils investing in estate regeneration and even fewer helping to support owner-occupiers of non-traditional homes. Working with colleagues across the council, we have secured the investment of £100,000 at no direct cost to the council to fund this project and attract up to a further £10,000 from eco grants from the government. External wall insulation has 6 key benefits. It reduces heating bills by reducing heat loss through walls. It helps to prevent damp and mould. It helps to use less fossil fuels for heating, reducing carbon emissions. It raises the temperature of internal walls, reducing the potential for condensation. And most importantly, I think it increases the thermal efficiency of walls by up to 85% in improving the energy performance rating of homes. And I think finally, the physical appearance of each home will be dramatically improved. The company who will carry out this installation will be using the Weatherby building system, the UK's leading external wall insulation supplier, and is tested to BBA standards. The products are also manufactured in the UK and are accredited to ISO 9001 quality management systems. The scheme represents a significant opportunity for the Council to show its desire to tackle climate change and improve the quality of life for local people. I'm hopeful that before too long, I'll be able to secure further funding for a second phase of improvement works and come back to committee asking for a second approval for the remaining properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'll just let you come back and take your seat on the top table just in case anybody wants to ask you any questions. All right, questions. First I have Councillor Wright.
Thank you for that, Rob. My only real question is how rare is it for councils to be this successful in getting this sort of funding to do all the things you've just listed off, help improve people's lives, help them with the energy bills, all these sorts of things, because it sounds like it's almost a bit unique to Derbyshire Dales. But if you can give me a little background on that, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. I think in terms of non-traditional homes that are remaining, there are about 1.5 million built post-World War II. Most of them went into public ownership, but of course, as the report outlines, quite a few ended up in home ownership through right to buy. And councils across the country were able to access in the 90s and early 2000s vast sums of money from urban renewal programs. And that had a massive impact, particularly in urban areas. And then through stock transfer, a lot of housing associations were able to improve the properties in their own ownership. But anywhere you go in England, you'll find communities with a small smattering of these properties left. And really you're left with homeowners who can't get a mortgage on a property, who can't afford the massive bill themselves to do the property up. And they're just left. And this is one of the few opportunities, certainly I'm aware of in Derbyshire, if not the East Midlands, where a council has actually taken a step to invest. So it is a rare thing and it's very positive.
Well, if through you, Chair, I know it's questions, but I'd love to move it if possible.
Does that find a seconder? I'll tell you what, I'll take Councillor Cruz because he got his hand up first anyway.
Thank you. I mean, clearly it's a great scheme, and I'm very supportive. The areas in my ward, so I think it's great that we're going after the money and implementing it. It will have a big impact. Do we ever see any sort of problems in implementing it, or any sort of after effects in terms of fitment, warranty issues, or anything like that? I'm just curious, or is it all plain sailing?
Nothing's ever plain sailing, is it? But the product has a 25-year life guarantee, which I'm sure by that time somebody else in my position would be coming up with another cunning plan to take the properties further forward again. So there will be a few weeks disruption to occupiers. That's a given. That's a lot less painful than full modernisation, which would mean having to leave the property for many weeks. The company Westfield are very experienced in this kind of work and do a lot of work with both the Notts and Derbyshire Local Authority Energy Partnership, who are also behind this scheme. So their customer service, I'm sure, will be tested, but we have every confidence in their ability.
Thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say this is a good news story, and thank you, Rob, and his team for getting this successfully through.
Yeah, I think we all share that, Peter. It is a good news story for the District Council. We're still in questions. Anybody else wanted to ask a question? Councillor Donnelly?
No, just going to make a comment.
Please do.
Just a story that happened to us a few years ago. We had one of these initiatives through the government scheme, whatever it was, and the guys come to do it and started drilling the walls, and they drilled the boiler house wall, which was singular, and they pumped it full of water. Quite interesting. Really.
So anyway, any more questions from members now?
Yeah.
In which Councillor Lees?
Yeah, I'll just clarify that I've seen this application done on quite a few properties, mainly in Staffordshire area, and it's been proved to be very energy efficient and it's a good system. So, well done, Rob.
So, no more questions. I'll move into debate. Any further in debate? No? In which case then we'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous and that's passed, so good luck with that, Rob. All right, other than that, it's just a little bit of housekeeping now. So, information on active and closed enforcement investigations. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that, John. So, moved second. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So now we'll move on to the appeals progress report, which I know John will want to pass some comment on.
Well, we've had a number of appeal decisions in, Chair. Just a couple of updates on the list on the second page. Oakstone Farm, Old Hackney Lane. That appeal, enforcement appeal, was allowed. So there's permission been granted there for a holiday let on the site. The one below it, South Parade at Matlock, Bath, that appeal has been dismissed, so they need to comply with the terms of the enforcement notice. I think also obviously of some local interest as well on the previous page was the decision on Bent Farm, which you've heard mentioned in dispatches earlier in the evening in terms of what's happened in that general area. Just to add a little bit of caution on that, all the inspector was looking at in allowing that appeal was the landscape impact of the hookup points and other works associated with accommodating a certified site. So we'll make sure that in operating that site, the owner of the site sticks by the terms of the certification.
Thank you very much, John. Also need is a mover to have it noted. Councillor Donnelly, seconder. Councillor Wayman, all those in favour, please show. And that's unanimous again. And thank you once again, committee members. You're free to go home. You'll just get home for Coronation Street if some of you quit.